At least as a contract. The landlord's going to sue you and say, you owe us money. Employment claims. Employees have been known to sue their employers from time to time for, wage and hour violations, discrimination, and the like. So, silver lining, that's always a good thing. So first of all, most volunteers are going to be in decent shape if they are getting sued in connection with their charitable work. So Congress passed something called the Volunteer Protection Act of 1997. And the basic idea is it gives conditional immunity for volunteers, and that includes officers, directors, and trustees. So regardless of your role in the organization, like whatever your title is, if you qualify as a volunteer, then you can get some immunity from suit. So, I'm going to get to some. There are exceptions to everything. There are always exceptions. So there's no blanket immunity on anything. But so a volunteer is going to be somebody who's performing services and they're getting less than $500 a year. So, if you get a T-shirt or pen, coffee mug, maybe that's compensation. I don't know. It's not going to add up to $500. But essentially, if you're not getting paid, or if you're getting like very small items in return, you should be under the $500 threshold. So you would be within the scope of the act. All right. What do they protect? So now we get to the exceptions. So you have no protection for willful misconduct, gross negligence. So willful misconduct is if you intentionally do something wrong. If you intentionally go up and punch someone in the face, assault someone or something like that. Gross negligence if you're being really dumb. Reckless misconduct. Operating a motor vehicle, vessel, or aircraft for which a license or insurance is required. So if you crash the car, you can still be in trouble. Or conscious flagrant indifference to the rights or safety of the person harmed. I'm sure all of these terms, and these are the terms from the Act, but I'm sure all of these terms have been tested or interpreted in the intervening years since this was passed. But these are the sorts of things that are not covered. So if you can fit into one of these categories, you may still be on the hook. So the Act protects you from liability. It does not protect you from being sued. Because if I were going to sue you, I would pick something from this list and say, boy, you were willfully, you engaged in willful misconduct, gross negligence, reckless misconduct, while operating a motor vehicle and flagrantly being indifferent to my safety. And it would be, I could still sue you if you could prove you didn't fit in, and by the way, you made more than $500. But if you could prove that you don't fit in any of these categories, then you're okay. They can't collect against you, but you still have to go through the hassle of being sued. Does anyone think the VPA of 1997 protects against claims by state or federal agencies? Yeah, of course not is the right answer. Yeah, no. Congress they're not going to tie their own hands. No. So it really protects you against claims from members of the public, individuals. So the slip and fall would be a good one. All right. So if you only have this sort of qualified protection or limited protection, the prudent thing to do is to buy some insurance because operating as a member of a charity, you are out in public interacting with other people. You are not monks. You're out there, and you're going to come into contact with people, and things may come up. So, what sort of insurance? Well, general liability is. Well, what sort of insurance did you get? Officer and director, general liability. What else?
And we had just regular liability for our organization for the youth and our volunteers.
Okay, so additional coverage for the volunteers. Okay, so general liability is going to protect your things that happen at your premises usually. Directors and officers protect you guys for decisions that you make. Employment insurance, so claims of employees. Fiduciary insurance, so if you're handling money for other people, like if you're sponsoring a retirement plan or something like that, you're a fiduciary for the people that you're handling the money for. Crime. So one issue with nonprofits is that sometimes people put their hand in the till and steal from you, unfortunately. And you can get insurance for that. And as we heard earlier, to the extent that you look like a solid, well-governed nonprofit that has all of its ducks in a row, it could help you out on the rates. You look, instead of like a bunch of people running things willy-nilly, you have all of the proper things in place and all of the proper procedures. You look like less of a potential liability to the insurance company. All right, we've been through this. So, do people have these questions memorized yet? So why do people have confidence? Is it because you're well insured? So I've asked this question a million times. Why are you going to have confidence in what's going on with a nonprofit? Because why? They do. They're well governed. What has changed? There's also a lot more stuff to worry about these days. Enterprising attorneys bringing all sorts of new claims against nonprofits that people hadn't thought of in the past. And how do you gain trust? Like, what can you do in order to make the public trust you, make the government trust you, or the media? Build relationships. Okay. See results. Okay. Positive results. Okay. You are what you do. So we're going to go to corporate governance policies instead of positive results, but I think positive results is a good answer. So corporate policies. Why have them? Why you have to have articles of organization? Why do you have all of this other paper? Well, you can have it for a million reasons. You can have clarity of purpose. So you can have policies that sort of take the vagary of your articles of organization, focus it down and say, this is what we are here to do. This is what we're supposed to do. Consistency and uniformity. Instead of it being a word of mouth thing in terms of what the organization is all about, you have it written down. And your volunteers and officers, directors, employees can go and look at it. And once if you have a very successful charity and you move beyond the sort of founding generation, people are still marching to the beat of the same drummer. Oversight. Remember earlier on the board of directors, the buck stops with you. And remember duty of care and the duty to supervise. You have a duty to watch to make sure that things are actually being done. Corporate policies can help with that. And then maintenance of internal controls. Do the numbers add up? So, and then fiduciary duties. Okay. So, policies, where do they fit? Are policies above the U.S. Constitution? No. No, you can't amend the Constitution through a policy. State law? No. Certificate of incorporation? No. Certificate of incorporation controls. That's a legal document. Bylaws? So is a conflict of interest policy in the pecking order above or below the bylaws? It's below, although you can vote on them. So corporate policies are kind of down at the bottom. Let's see. So let's just start with the sort of day-to-day stuff. Are you all corporations? Are there any charitable trusts in the room? Anyone a charitable trust? Did I see hands in the back for charitable trusts? Yes? No? Maybe so? All right. This applies mainly to corporations. Trusts operate in a slightly different way. But a corporation, as you know, is a legal entity that you set up by filing with the state. It has perpetual life. It is the legal fiction is that whether for-profit or non-profit, it is a person, hence the corporation or body. And because it's a separate person, there are certain sort of formal things that you're supposed to do with it. So one that is helpful is have a mission statement, have bylaws, keep minutes, resolutions, and consents, and corporate policies. All right. Do you all have mission statements? Okay. What is the mission statement? What you're doing, right? It's like the elevator speech. So this is the sort of concise description of who you are and what you do. So if you meet a potential person on the street, you say, "Hi, here is a copy of our bylaws." No. Or here is my gift acceptance policy. Give me a gift. No. So the mission statement is what you're all about. Why are you here? What do you do? What is your point? And it can be mercifully short. The bylaws. What are they? That is correct in a way. They're below the Articles of Organization, and the Articles control, but the Articles usually don't cover very much. They're like the skeleton that holds it up. The bylaws are the flesh. They sort of flesh out what it is that you're supposed to do and how you operate. The detailed set of rules governing the operation and organization and the governing structure. So the bylaws say when your meetings are, do you have monthly meetings, quarterly meetings, an annual meeting? If you have members, what are their rights? Who gets you have, how many you need to have a quorum. So if it's time for the organization to make a decision and you have 7 directors and 6 show up, can you act? No. Do you have to wait for the 7th guy? Yeah, so the bylaws are going to say, what's a quorum? They're going to tell you. Can you talk to each other over the phone? Or you have to meet in person? The bylaws do all of this. They're like the operating instructions for the organization. Minutes, resolutions, and consents. So 5 years from now, when somebody asks you why you bought the van and who said you could buy the van, you look at the minutes and you say, the minutes will say, on such and such a date, the directors voted to purchase a van for the organization. So it's a diary of the actions of the organization's governing body. So it sort of says, the board met, who was present, this is what we voted on, and you can keep track of what was decided, why you did particular things, when you made particular decisions. You sort of flip through it. You keep a minute book that contains the minutes from the board, and you can remember what happened. The fact that something is in the minute book indicates that it was voted upon, can be used as proof that this is the corporate policy. It's not somebody going off and being a cowboy and making a decision on their own. You have proof that you have the backing, the legal backing of the board, because it's been voted upon and recorded in the minutes. So it's a history. It's like a history book of where you've gone. Corporate policies. Who can establish these? Yeah, definitely the board. If you have an executive director. maybe. I mean, maybe the executive director says, what is the policy with respect to the photocopier or something like that. I would have the board vote on conflicts of interest. I think it's best for the important ones to be handled by the board. So what kind of policies are out there? There are rules and procedures used to ensure efficiency, consistency, and accountability. So it's not the sort of mechanics of how the charity as a whole works. That's the bylaws and the articles of organization. But rather they cover certain subject matters. So like conflicts of interest, when do you accept gifts, how do you expend money, things, yes?
Just going back to the bylaws.
Yes.
In some organizations, the executive director, the founder, is the same person.
Okay.
And question to you is, with the bylaws, should that individual have any input when the board is discussing or changing the bylaws? Is that something?
Is the person on the board too?
No, the person is the executive director and the founder,
But not a board member.
not a board member.
If they're not a board member, they're not a board member. They can come to board meetings and report on what is going on. The executive director would be the day-to-day person, right? The person who's there every day. The board members are not necessarily there every day. But when it is time to vote on something, if you're not a board member, you don't have a vote.
No, I'm not saying a vote.
Yeah.
I'm just asking, let's say you're revisiting the bylaws.
Yes.
Can the executive director have any say in the revision of the bylaws? Let's say
Not officially. So the bylaws are enacted by the board. They're the people who get to decide what's in them. Now, the board doesn't have to operate in a vacuum. They can go and ask people's opinions. So they could ask, if they have a lawyer, they could ask their lawyer. If there are senior staff, they're like the executive director or other people, they could say, what about this? What do you think about that? But they don't have the right. They don't have the right to get anything if they're not a board member.
they don't have the right
To get any, they can't veto it. They can't force anything in there. Yeah.
The reason why I asked, I sit on a board and we were revising the bylaws.
Mhm.
The executive director was in the meeting also.
Okay.
But he was giving his input, like, telling us based on this is not working, this is working.
Input is fine.
Right, that's what I'm
Yeah,
asking. Can they give
but
input?
let me ask this:
Decision leads to the board to discuss.
did your board ever discuss the revisions to the bylaws outside of the presence of the executive director?
Yes.
So you had this person, you heard their say, and then you said thank you very much, and then you had an opportunity to go and talk amongst yourselves, and either thumbs up, thumbs down. Yeah, that's fine. Yes.
Can the executive director and the president of the board be the same one person?
Well, an officer can be a director. It's very common for them to be directors. An executive director usually connotes is usually someone who's not an officer. Now, I don't know under New York law. I'm from Boston, but I don't know under New York law if there is any restriction on the executive director being a board member or not. I'm not sure.
So what are you saying is the difference between officer and a board of director member?
Okay, an officer, what is the difference between an officer and board of director members? Good question. So the board of directors is the sort of ultimate governing body, unless you have members, and then they are the ultimate governing body. But normally it's going to be the board. So the board of directors, it's not expected that they are going to be doing the day-to-day stuff. They will meet periodically and get involved in the big decisions. And they are the ones who have to get together and vote on the big things in order to make them effective. You don't have new articles of organization or new bylaws. You don't change the name of the charity unless the board votes. All right. The officers are the people who have more of the like day-to-day operating responsibility. So, the president can be the public face of the organization, keeps a thumb on what's going on a day-to-day basis. The treasurer is obviously going to be ultimately responsible for holding the purse strings. A secretary will keep the records. They're going to be more active on a day-to-day basis, and they can be directors, or they don't have to be directors. But the directors hire and fire the officers. All right. So if you're the president, you have a boss, and the boss is the board. And the board can make no. You can be both.
Okay.
But if you're the president, you're not going to be the entire board. You're just a board member, and people can say, you've done a nice enough job, but we think it's time to move on, and they can vote you out. So the board is I had an earlier slide that said the buck stops with them, and that is true. They pick the officers, they hire them, they fire them. Maybe the president hires the employees or the upper level management, but the sort of big cheeses at the top, those are going to be the board. Yes.
Have a general membership.
If you have a membership,
Yes.
okay.
Can they elect the officers and the board?
So okay. So the question is if you're a membership organization. So it depends upon your bylaws and your rules. But basically, you think of a for-profit corporation. Okay. At the end of the day, who's in charge of the for-profit corporation? Shareholders. All right. The board is legal, like with a nonprofit, the board is legally responsible for what goes on. Just for-profit, nonprofit, the board makes the big decisions. But in the for-profit world, it's the shareholders who elect the board. So you will always hear, there's some like proxy fight going on in such and such a corporation where, investors are trying to go and, pack the board with people that they like and get rid of the guys who are on there now. It's the stockholders who get to decide. All right, in a nonprofit, there are no stockholders. Nobody owns a nonprofit. In fact, to be a 501c3 organization, you cannot have private inurement in any way, meaning that you can't have individual owners who are benefiting from the income or assets of the charity. That's a great way of getting in trouble. So there's nobody calling up the nonprofit board saying, "Where's my dividend?" Or so, what are you doing a share buyback? There's none of that. But some charities are organized in a way that they have members, and members are going to be loosely analogous to shareholders. So if you have a membership organization, then the members have rights to go and appoint the board, and then the board would usually appoint the officers. So at the very beginning, remember I had a slide that sort of like listed out the board, the officers, the executive director, employees, volunteers, and then I stuck members again at the top. Not everybody has. In the pen.
Yeah.
Yes.
My question is about non-for-profit. When the director being paid $700,000 and the employees are being told that there is no money in the agency to give you a raise, but then you read in the papers that the director is being paid this amount.
Yes.
Is there a cutoff rate where directors for non-for-profit should be paid?
Is there a cutoff rate for what they should be paid?
Because I know directors be paid $700,000 and it's called non-for-profit.
Okay, so you're saying that maybe someone's profiting a little bit. All right, so that's
Do we use ratio? Is there a ratio that you should look at? The director versus the budget, is there a ratio? Do you Good, that would make the company
Oh.
still a regular.
All right, let me try answering those questions. So is there a ratio? I'm not aware of a ratio.
It's not really, is whatever
Like
you
a certain percentage of the organization's budget that can go towards or any person's salary. There's like a percentage of it.
That may be a New York specific requirement.
I know, I know.
No? So it's our rule of thumb.
When you're applying for RFP,
I'm not talking.
Oh, they ask you what percentage it is? Okay.
yeah, they'll say if you're applying to.
Don't call us if you're making too much money?
No, if you're
Okay.
applying to Bob will say to get my money, the director can only get 20%.
Okay.
All the money.
Okay, all right, so,
Something
so,
like that.
so what this does is this circles back to things that we were talking about before. So I am aware of no legal cap on what you can make. In Massachusetts, maybe 2 years ago, we had a scandal where a nonprofit healthcare organization was paying their directors a lot of money. I don't know if it was 700,000, but it was a lot of money. A ton of money. And the directors were people who were like politically wired. It didn't look good. And there was a bill that the Attorney General advanced that basically would have said, if you're on a nonprofit board, you're a volunteer. And that bill was not enacted. So that was a knee-jerk type reaction where they said the amount of money that is reasonable is 0. Now, I am not aware in New York if there's any cap. I don't think there is one. But this kind of gets back to the sort of governance issues and compensation issues that we were talking about before. So what are you, in the idea that the 990 is information return and embarrassment return, so what are you comfortable disclosing? So if your organization is going to publicly say, our directors make $700,000 a year, if you're not comfortable saying that as an organization, it's probably too much money. There's the old expression that don't do anything that you wouldn't want to appear on the front page of the New York Times. Don't do anything that you wouldn't want to appear on your 990 on the internet, or that you wouldn't want to appear in an RFP. So I don't think that there's a number, but you probably, when you look at it, you can say that's too much or that's too little. On a percentage base, it's hard to say because maybe there's a nonprofit that offers like once a week or once a year. Like they have a fundraiser. I can think of the one that I've dealt with. They have like charity baseball games and things like that to raise money for spinal cord injuries. They're not operating every day. They're operating sometimes. That's very different from running a major university. When you expect that the directors of some who have that kind of responsibility, that kind of time commitment are going to be paid more than the directors of an organization that's much smaller. But you should feel comfortable in being able to justify it as an organization. And clearly, you were very uncomfortable with the way that was set up. So you wouldn't give them money, right?
It was the funny thing about it. It was in the papers in New York.
Yes.
It was one of the a big paper where the director of this organization was paid that much of money. That's the reason why I brought it up. It was in the papers during the summer of last year.
Yes.
It was on the front page, and it was appalling. So that's the reason why I asked that question. Where is the gap when it comes to directors for non-for-profit being making this enormous money? Because I know that the governor one time was thinking about making a cap on the expenses of the state of New York for directors. Como, he discussed that, but I don't know what happened.
Did it? Yeah, I don't know. And do you know what happens? Is the person still on the board? And
Yes.
still making that money?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
They were shamed out. Okay. Interesting.
okay then.
Yes, I Yes.
With the cap issue, can you write a cap into the bylaws?
Sure. Why not?
Because I was thinking of doing that for my organization.
say, oh, you know, we're not gonna get the right people if we put a cap on there. But if you want a cap, and you have good people who will serve, then do it. And then you can go around and you can tell people.
And you could link it to inflation, the rate of inflation.
I mean, I wouldn't pay them a percentage of the overall assets, because then there's like a, you know, conflict of interest, like they wanna drive up the size of the charity and then drive their own pay. But I would say, sure, you know, I would pay them a set amount, yes.
As we're setting up our corporation, we're discussing the size of the board. I think it should be, do you have any comments about that?
It shouldn't be so few people that it's unaccountable, and it shouldn't be so many that it's unwieldy. I don't know, it depends, it's whatever's right for you. And you know, and also too, the size of the board is not something that is set in stone. It is something that is typically included in the bylaws, and the board can vote to change the bylaws. So if you feel like you have just like too many cooks stirring the broth, you can shrink the size of the board. Yes.
Hopefully one last question. Recently I've heard that CEOs or executive directors are entering into contracts with their board. Have you ever heard that?
So they're entering into some sort of employment agreement?
Yes, contract.
That's going to cover what?
Basically, I think even when they're, you know, some kind of compensation that is set up, even if they lose their job.
You're talking about a golden parachute? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I don't deal with it personally. I think in a larger organization, yes, such things occur. But I couldn't really say what is appropriate and what is not appropriate in those circumstances. I know that if it is shocking to the conscience, then it's not fair. Yes.
I believe that most of the organizations we are speaking about, profit from big organizations that have funders such as the New York Times media, some people behind that type of money, they want to get that big type of salaries, and they have employees who are 300, 400. So that's different. What I want to get to is smaller community-based organizations.
Yes.
Which we are all, I don't know.
Which I assume you all are, yes.
I'm not really concerned about a big corporation who have 400 employees.
Yes.
And have to pay us. But I come from a big organization, and they must pay for the type of work I'm doing in the community. But also, I'm part of a small organization that maybe consists of 5 members on the board, and we have our 501c3. And what I want you, can a secretary, because we have it because it's right, can a secretary hold more than one position inside of this small organization?
So can these,
Can be the treasurer and also be the secretary, community. I'm not getting
yeah.
it from you.
So that's a New York.
No, I don't mean.
No, it's a New York. It's a New York corporate law question. I don't know the answer to it. I don't know the answer to that one.
Is that based on your bylaws? Kind of bylaws?
No. So typically the New York statute is going to say usually that you need a president, treasurer, and secretary, and it will require that there be at least 2 individuals in there. You know, the secretary can be a board member, but you're not going to be every officer all at once. And but I do not know off the top of my head the answer to that specific question. But there is an answer to it, and that's a statutory question. There is a rule. Yeah, you can't hold more than 2. Okay.
If I go on like a small community-based organization.
Yes.
And I run into this type of behavior.
Yes.
And they are the ones who receive 501c3 go behind funding from city council.
Yes.
And somehow it's in
But let's think about the reason for a rule like that. The reason that you would want multiple officers is for accountability. Because if there is one person who is the whole charity, they are not really accountable to anyone. I mean, they file things and you can look them up on the internet, but there's day to day, there's no one looking over their shoulder. If you have multiple officers, they do provide some checks on each other, and it's a good thing. So, if you're dealing with an organization that, where somebody wants to centralize power, I don't think that's a good step.
And also, are they, I'm sorry, Peter, are they allowed to be paid?
Are they?
By the founders, and if they're one of the founding members, the secretary, are they allowed to be paid? No.
So you can. I'm sorry. Is the question that is the secretary allowed to be paid? Yeah, officers are allowed to be paid, but it's not necessarily appropriate. I got a lot of feedback. So in a very small organization like the one that you're describing, there has to be money that's left over for charity. So there has to be money that's there in order to help carry out the charitable purposes. If all of the money is going to salaries for the board members, officers, and directors, you don't have a charity. It's not a charity.
It's called Feed the Board.
It's called Feed the Board. Think about it. I referenced earlier, there are some charities that give out 3%, 4%, 3 or 4 cents on the dollar, because all the other money is getting skimmed off for salaries, contracts, fundraisers. You're not a charity if that's going on. So if you have a very small organization, I wouldn't be thinking about this stuff, because what little money you have should be going for charitable purposes.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Where were we? So, well, this is why you have the slides, so you can get right back on track. So, corporate policy. So, what do we have? Conflict of interest, gift acceptance, investment management, banking. All right. What goes into a corporate policy? Statement of purpose. What is it designed to cover? Is it how do you accept gifts? How do you spend money? If you have an endowment, how much of it do you spend each year? Guidelines. So what are you supposed to cover? What are you supposed to do and not do? Procedures to implement how you actually get it done. What happens if you break it? What is the slap on the wrist? And then annual statement or acknowledgement. And I find with the charities that I work with, people always hate this one the most. So, statement of purpose, what is the need for the policy? Why do you need a conflict of interest policy? For obvious reasons. Because you want to make sure that people are acting in the best interests of the charity, that they are, exercising their duties of loyalty and the like. So the guidelines, what is it that you're trying to promote or prohibit as a result of the policy? What is it that you are supposed to do? How do you implement it? So what are you supposed to do? Conflict of interest policy. So let's say you did want to go, you had a board member who owns a building, right? And they have a little extra space, and they say, I know that the charity will go, I know that you guys need space, I have space available, I am willing to go and give it to you at 2/3 of the market rate. It's a good deal, right? It's a great deal. But you're also enriching the board member. So even though there's a potential conflict of interest here, it's not necessarily something that you have to say, no, sorry, we can't take it. You're a board member. There is a way of doing this, and this can be spelled out in a conflict of interest policy. So sort of typical situation is the interested board member would make his pitch and then leave the room. And the remaining board members, the ones who don't have any financial stake in this, would get to decide. They would get to vote. So they would, I presume they would say yes in this situation, but they would get to decide without the participation or pressure from the interested member. So that's an example of implementation. Violation, so if there's a violation of the policy, let's say that there was a real conflict of interest and somebody did violate it, what happens to them? Is there some censure vote or something like that, or they go on some bad list? And then the annual statement or acknowledgement. So how do you ensure that individuals that are covered by the policy do not act as my 4-year-old would? He's 5 now. But typically, what we do is we have, when we generate conflict of interest policies, we have this annual statement that the board members have to sign saying, I've read it, I have the conflict of interest policy, I've read it, and then also, here are my potential conflicts. So, if you have that, below market lease, you would list it, you would identify the conflicts, and you do it every year. So my now 5-year-old would try to get out of trouble by saying something like, I forgot, I didn't remember, I lost it, or something like that. With this sort of policy, that's not an excuse. And you're taking that excuse away by making sure that they sign every single year saying, yeah, I've read the policy, I have it, I know I'm bound by it, I'm aware, I can't pretend I forgot. It's a good internal control. So it's a good way of keeping an eye on the people. They're not necessarily doing anything wrong, but you're sort of forcing them every single year to put pen to paper and say, yeah, I know I'm supposed to be doing this. All right. So the typical questions again. Why do you have confidence? What has changed? How do you get people to trust you? So these sort of internal controls, good policies, these can help. So people can have confidence in nonprofits perhaps because they know that they have good governance, that they're not loosey-goosey, that they have good internal controls. You could be more trusting of an organization that says, we cover this stuff. And not only is it a piece of paper that we produce once and throw in a cabinet, the board members have to sign off on this every single year. All right, so I want to stay on track. So, all right, you've got all the paper policies, bylaws, you've elected everybody, what are you supposed to do? So, how do you keep your ducks in a row? So the board book, first one I mentioned here, do people know what that term means? All right, so if you are a director, you've theoretically voted on all of this stuff, signed all of this stuff, or at least signed on to it by dint of becoming a director. So a board book is just sort of like a fancy name for a compilation of the important documents associated with a charity. So it would be a 3-ring binder or something spiral bound that contains the stuff that you really ought to know if you're a member of the board, like copy of the articles of organization, copy of the most recent version of the bylaws, copies of the important policies, copies of most recent years or most recent 2 years financial statements, annual filings, tax returns. If you have a major contract, so if you contract with a government agency or something like that, and your whole charity kind of revolves around that, you might want to have a copy of that in the board book too. So all of the stuff that you should be up on as a board member can go in the board book. If you're a new board member, you can have an initial orientation. Yes.
Question. With the board, as a small organization,
Yes.
getting people to sit on your board might be a problem. Is there do you have to have a contract with them, or can you offer somebody a contract to sit on your board, or?
No, you
Yes.
wouldn't have you normally wouldn't have a contract with a board member because you can vote them in and you can vote them out. I wouldn't, especially for a small organization, what are you going to do with a contract? You'd say, we owe you money. If we don't like it, we kick you out.
Protecting our what we're doing. Like they don't go to some other agency and say, oh, this is what they're doing over there. Let's do it instead.
You're worried that they're going to rip off your idea?
Yes.
You should be so lucky. If they're ripping off your idea, doesn't that mean that you're doing something really beneficial to the community? Right? isn't imitation the sincerest form of flattery in this situation? I mean, I wouldn't be concerned about, you're not for-profit organizations fighting over a limited market. I wouldn't worry about that. And if you have some shady character who joins your board, you can vote them out too. If they are doing things that are inappropriate, the bylaws will typically contain a mechanism for how directors come on and off. And if there's some sort of violation going on, you can get rid of them. But I wouldn't, especially with a small organization, I wouldn't do that. Yes, in the back.
I wanted to speak to what you're talking about a board manual or a board book.
Yes.
I'm a consultant and I've done a lot of board orientation and
Yes.
development.
Okay.
I think that is so important because, board manual, that's something that you can have as a board member to bring with you at all the meetings. And I can't tell you how many times people will have like, oh, what did we discuss like 4 months ago? And then they'll look through their board manual, they have all of their minutes. It's just a great way to stay organized and on top of stuff. And if you need to look at your policies, because you're not going to remember everything at the top of your mind when you're at a meeting. And then secondly, to what you were talking about, I think that sometimes people will ask people to come on their board without really taking the time to really see if it's a true match.
Yeah.
So, you touched on, I guess it's kind of a trust issue maybe, but when you're approaching someone, you're going to want to have at least 3 conversations. One is to see what would they be getting out of it, because it has to be a mutual exchange, right? There has to be something in it for them as well. But also just to get to know the person, right? And then see if not only its skills, but what they bring to the board, but also what interaction and exchange So anyway, I can talk more later.
No, please.
Agenda to use the board to get where they want to get. Yeah. So, yeah.
Right. Right.
Because that's expensive. Board abuse. So true.
All right. So, but thank you for saying that. Like that's helpful. And will you take questions afterwards from people? Okay. And yes.
I have a specific question about the treasurer and the secretary. Does the secretary record who voted for what on any issue that comes to a vote?
I've seen it done different ways, but yeah, I would. And if I were somebody who was voting against something that was passing, I would want to make sure that my no vote was recorded in the minutes.
And the question about the treasurer is, does that have to be a person who has a background in accounting or bookkeeping, or can it be somebody who's just?
It doesn't have to be somebody who has a. Yeah, you're responsible for the money, but there's not a requirement that I'm aware of that you have to be a CPA or anything like that.
Because we were thinking that if we couldn't find a treasurer, maybe we would hire somebody.
I think you need a treasurer. You need someone who has that responsibility. Even if you're hiring, like sort of delegating a little bit, the treasurer would be the person supervising it. So you want a treasurer. Okay. So staying on track. So conducting, we should say, initial interviews and an initial orientation, just to sort of bring them up to speed with the organization, and then continuing education. And you can talk to Miguel about that. There are other free educational opportunities that are out there, but people can be reminded of, the responsibilities of being on a board. All right. So I've mentioned GuideStar in the past. There are other watchdog groups that are out there. So these are all, Charity GuideStar is a website. Charity Navigator is a website. Better Business Bureau is out there. There's all of these organizations that are out there that record information about charities, and then many of them rate charities on different metrics too. So, I guess you could say Big Brother is watching you. Big Brother is a website, but they help keep you on track. So, returns and reports. I mentioned this earlier, but every charity has to file something with the feds every year. 990 or 990 PF. And then under there's also a 990 EZ, 990 N. If you're a public charity, it will be one of those flavors. If you're a private foundation, it will be 990 PF. Are there any private foundations in here?
We have the state filing also.
Yes, it's the form CHAR 500. Yeah. So virtually every state, there are exceptions because it's a federal union and states can go their different ways, but pretty much every state gives the Attorney General an oversight role over charities. New York is no exception. The Attorney General has a very strong oversight role here. And at the state level, you have to file annually Form CHAR 500. Yes?
Again, going back to the exemption, not we filed an exemption, or exemption. Again, it's less than $5,000. That change?
Pardon me?
$10,000.
Okay. The federal level, you have to file something every single year. State, you may be right. Yeah, I don't know the cutoff in New York State. In Massachusetts, you always got to file, but New York, I don't know.
At one time, there was
Yeah.
it was $10,000.
Yeah.
We filed for an exemption, we haven't.
Okay.
We have never,
But are you always below 10,000?
we have always been.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fortunately or unfortunately?
It's a small. It's
Yeah.
Small, and, small.
Okay. So I yes.
You do have to, even if you don't hit 10,000, you have to report it, otherwise your tax exempt will be taken back.
Well, let me comment on that. So these are different things. So tax exempt is federal. So whether you're exempt or non-exempt from income taxes is determined at the federal level. The sort of state attorney general role is your operation as a charity, and they usually run together. So for all you guys, they're going to run together, but they technically are different concepts. So you can operate as a charity all you want without ever bothering to go and file to be tax exempt. If you want to serve the community and distribute all of your money, more power to you. You can operate in a way that will have you classified as a charity, and you might just be too lazy to go and get tax exempt status, but it is certainly conceivable. And then you also can go and be tax exempt and not have to file charity reports. So if you're not a charity. So the organization my wife ran, it was a 501c4 social welfare organization. So that can run the gamut of organizations that help the community to hardcore lobbying groups. She was on the organizations that help the community end of the spectrum, and it was like a community playroom for small children in a particular area. So it didn't benefit the people at large. You had to become a member in order to use the playroom. It was a 501c4. And the way that it sort of fit in Massachusetts is you had to file a 990 every year, but you didn't have to file the Massachusetts equivalent to the CHAR 500 because it wasn't a charity. So for you guys, you will usually have to do both of these because you'll be charities and you'll be tax exempt, but they are not necessarily the same. All right, and then just as a reminder, I know I've said this before, freely available on the internet, so people can look you up and see what you put down. All right, so that is it for me. That is my contact information, and I'm happy to take questions. Yes?
We run a summer program. We're 501c4. We run a children's program.
Yes.
We teach them how to play golf.
Okay.
We have certified, actually professional golfers who got some of the volunteers.
Yes.
We also wanted to give them a stipend.
Okay.
Because they were, professional golfer basically we charge $100 an hour for a lesson. And we wanted to
It sounds like taxable income to me.
Taxable income, even if it's, the total amount of money they will be receiving is $800, really.
What-
it covers-
If it's over $600, why do we have to file?
so it's
A 1099. Yeah.
Over $600, you have to file a 1099. So
Yeah.
under $600, I don't have. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I that may be that number, that threshold sounds correct to me, but it is income.
So the whole-
Yeah.
okay.
You're paying them income.
It's a stipend, again,
Yeah.
you know, the travel expenses and.
A stipend is income.
Okay.
I can also tell you that the workers' comp board in New York State has been very tough
On this issue?
on this issue, very tough lately. And it has to be that the people are working on their own time and not being managed and not coming at set times. Otherwise, you might have hassle. So
You might have to pay workers' comp insurance on that $25 stipend. Yeah, you gotta be careful. Once you start paying people, you have to be careful. Okay. What else?
You incorporate in another state that operates in New York.
Pardon me?
If you incorporate in another state.
Can you operate in New York? Yes. Yes. So state, this was a question, if you incorporate in another state, can you operate in New York? And the answer is yes. So charities can operate across state lines, but you would, if you were incorporated in, what state do you have in mind? Pennsylvania, and you were operating in New York, then you would have to register in New York with the Attorney General. So you had to register if you're soliciting in New York, soliciting donations from the public. You'd have to abide by the solicitation rules here for things that you do in the state. There are states, there are charities that operate in all 50 states in the union. What else?
I have a question. In terms of the corporate book that you talked about creating.
Yes.
Can you break that in the sky drive,
Can you what?
Can you put it in the cloud?
Sure.
Corporate book?
Yeah. No. This is just something that's helpful. It's not a requirement. But yeah, you can put it in the cloud if you think that's the like most easily accessible place. I mean, if people are going to sit at, if that's the easiest way for them to access this, that's totally fine. Okay. Yes.
Did I understand you to say that if people pay, let's say, an annual fee to participate in the activities, that it's not a charity and it has to be a 501c4?
No, I didn't say that. I was giving an example of an organization that's organized as a social welfare organization. So it had like a closed membership, and you paid a fee to become a member in order to use the facilities. Yeah. What else? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming and for sticking around, and it was useful. Okay.
So guys, please fill out the evaluation. Nonprofit Help Desk relies on the evaluation to continually improve the workshops that they provide, so I appreciate that. Also, if you guys are not familiar, if you want additional support for nonprofits, there's also the United Way. They have a board workshop, a board training workshop that you should take advantage of. And that's it. Thank you for coming. You can hand me the evaluations once they're done.
Thank you, everyone.
I got my business cards here if you're, yes, if you want to be put on the list for the other workshops.
I do. I think they're in my bag. Let me just find out how to turn this on. A long time ago, actually.
You know, email me, I'll put you on the list, because it's like an automated list.
Yeah, we
So it would have been from high school 20 years ago.
Oh, okay.
But it was.
But we have a summer program.